Before we get into Genesis chapter 29, I want to look back at chapter 28 because some discussion came up last week concerning Esau and his marrying within the family, or close to within the family, as he goes to marry some daughters of Ishmael. Genesis chapter 28, let's read verses 6 through 9, and then we're going to read a few commentaries concerning some people's speculation about what Esau may be doing here. And we can throw it open for discussion and then go from there. We know that Isaac wanted Jacob, verses 1 through 5 of Genesis 28, not to marry the people of the land, the people of Canaan, but to marry within the family. And so, if you look at verse 6, now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram, to take to himself a wife from there, and that when he blessed him, he charged him, saying, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Verse 7, and that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and had gone to Padan Aram. Verse 8, so Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan displeased his father and his father Isaac. Verse 9, and Esau went to Ishmael and married besides the wives that he had taken Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Now, the question had come up, and we discussed it a little bit last week. Why did Esau do this? And a couple of answers basically were given. Number one answer was given. He did this to add further grief to Isaac and to Rebekah, his parents, to give them a hard time and to really add insult to injury, so to speak. Another thing that came up as far as a possible explanation is that he saw that he wanted that his father Jacob wanted, or his father Isaac wanted Jacob to marry within the family, and that would please his parents. So Esau thought to himself, well, I'm going to do the same. So he goes to Ishmael, which is a descendant or the son of Abraham, and marries one of those daughters. And we discussed that a little bit last week as well. Let me read just a few things as far as what some commentators say concerning this. One commentator, this is the Genesis record, Henry Morris, he says the fact that Isaac had sent Jacob far away to find a wife from Rebekah's people emphasized to Esau that his father, as well as his mother, was highly displeased with Esau's choices of wives. Remember, he had already married 2 women, and it says in Genesis 27 and verse 46 that the daughters of Heth were giving all kinds of trouble to Rebekah and Isaac. And so it was trouble in that sense. In a belated attempt to partially correct the situation, Esau went to the home of his uncle Ishmael and secured one of the daughters, Mahalath, as another wife. This was a rather pathetic attempt, a closing of the barn door after the horse was gone. Esau had been spiritually blind and stubborn about his all-important issue of an appropriate wife for many years, but now that it was too late, he made a last desperate attempt to regain the favor of his parents and of God. So this commentator is under the impression that Esau was trying to gain a little bit of favor in doing this, marrying within the family, so to speak. Well, let's read one more as far as a commentary, or a couple more as far as commentaries go, concerning this. This commentator says, concerning Esau going to Ishmael and marrying a daughter of Ishmael, marrying back into the line of Abraham through the family of Ishmael seemed to have been a ploy to gain favor with his father and to show an obedience similar to his brother. He hoped by such gratifying of his parents to atone for past discrepancies and maybe have his father change the will. So again, this commentator is under the impression that perhaps he was trying to seek favor once again. But then you have others that say it's not that at all. This is another commentary. It says, after Jacob left the family home, Esau went and married 2 other women, this time from the family of Ishmael. It is not plain whether Esau did this to show spite towards his mother or father, or to placate them by marrying some women more closely related to their family. So it's one of those issues of discussion. What motivated Esau in doing this? Well, you have probably as many different answers as you have those who are commentators on the subject. We know what he did. What was his motive? We can speculate on that. But we know what he did. And that's the important thing. We have it recorded what he did. So whether his attempt was trying to please them or whether his attempt was just trying to add insult to injury, we can't be very clear on the matter. But it is clear that Esau is already has 2 wives, and now he's marrying again from the family of Ishmael, which is in the family of Abraham, so to speak. Any question or comment on that? Mm-hmm. They were the people of Canaan, right? Daughters of Canaan, of the land, and so they were not of the family of Abraham, and therefore they would not have shared the same values, things of that nature, and so they gave problems to Isaac and Rebekah. Look at chapter 29 and verse 1. We've already seen the ladder or stairway to heaven. Genesis 28 verses 10 through 22, where Jacob sees this vision at night, a stairway or ladder, it is translated, up into heaven, and the angels of God ascending and descending on it. And it makes a big impression upon him. And he wishes to serve the Lord, if the Lord will bring him back to that place. And in fact, verse 22, or look at verse 20 of Genesis chapter 28. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. Verse 22. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. So here you have this vision, this word from God given to Jacob, and it makes a profound impact on him. And so he is growing spiritually, so to speak, based upon this information that was given to him. Remember, he was told that his descendants would grow and that he would be blessed. God now is telling him that. He got that information first from Isaac, his father, but now it's been reassured to him by God that the promise that was made to Abraham would be passed to him. Of course, later on, Jacob's name will be changed to Israel, and he will produce the patriarchs that will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Look at chapter 29 and verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the sons of the east. And he looked and he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep were lying there beside it. For from that well they watered the flocks. Now the stone on the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, they would then roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. So they would keep this well covered. Probably one main reason to do that is to try to keep the water as pure as possible and to keep it from evaporating. That's a very hot, desolate area. Wells were very, very valuable. And therefore, you don't want the water evaporating, so you keep it covered as much as possible. Verse 4, Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where are you from?" And they said, "We are from Haran." That's where he is supposed to be going. Verse 5, he said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." Verse 6, and he said to them, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "It is well, and here is Rachel, his daughter, coming with the sheep." So now he is about to meet Rachel. Verse 7. He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered." And they roll the stone from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep. So they're basically saying to him, we're going to wait till all of the sheep get there. Verse 9, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess, a female shepherd. That was not uncommon in that period of time. Now, notice how this is the opposite. Rachel being a shepherdess, someone who is works outdoors, and you compare that with Jacob. Jacob, where was his dwelling? Remember? He dwelt in his youth in the tents. And he did a lot of his work close to his mother in the tents, a dweller in the tents. And so he is going to get with Rachel, and Rachel is someone that's accustomed to being outdoors, a rugged individual, like his brother Esau, actually. Verse 10, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the mouth of the well and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So he saw that, and he moved the stone when he saw Rachel. You're going to kind of see what motivated him a little bit later on. She was not hard to look at, to put it in mild terms. So this motivated him to go and remove the stone so that the animals could drink of that well. Verse 11, then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted his voice and wept. Now, some might say, well, that's strange. He's kissed her, and they hadn't even gone on the first date yet, and here he is kissing her. Well, this is a kiss of greeting. This isn't a romantic kiss. It's a kiss of greeting that they engaged in that culture, both male and female. Both male and female would meet one another, and they would engage in that kiss on the cheek, and it was as common as how we just shake hands. So that's not anything out of the ordinary. In fact, verse 12, Jacob told Rachel that he was a relative of her father, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Verse 13, so when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran out to meet him, embraced him, and kissed him. Well, again, that's a kiss of greeting. And this would have been more so because Laban recognizes him as a relative. This is someone who is in the family. That's why Laban, when he heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, He ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house, verse 13. Then he related to Laban all these things. Verse 14. Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. So it's referring to him as being a relative. You're my bone and you're my flesh. We're related to one another. And so he stayed with him. Look at verse 15. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. And Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and face. You see what motivated him to go over there and take that stone off and help out the situation? He saw Rachel. She was beautiful in form and face. She was a beautiful woman. Now Leah's, it's implied here that she was not quite as attractive as Rachel. Her eyes were weak. Some translations might translate that a little bit differently, referring to her eyes maybe not as strong as far as how she could see, or it may be referring to the fact that she's just not as beautiful, not as attractive as her sister Rachel. Verse 18. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Now he wants to marry, Jacob wants to marry Rachel, the younger daughter. Leah is the firstborn, so to speak, before Rachel. Keep that in mind. Verse 19. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. Stay with me. So he's recognizing in Jacob a potential for a good son-in-law. It's better for me to give her to you in marriage than to give her to some other man. Verse 20. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. That's a beautiful statement of love. He served for 7 years Laban, and it says in verse 20 that it just seemed like a few days because he loved Rachel so much. It seemed like a few days. So that shows how he loved her and was gladly working to have her as his wife. Now, verses 21 through 35, you find Laban's treachery. What goes around comes around. The deception that Jacob had made earlier with his mother towards his father to steal the blessing. That deception is going to come upon him now. You see, you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. To a certain extent in this life, but most certainly in the life to come. So now he is going to get a taste of his own medicine through Laban. Look at verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is completed, that I may go in to her. Verse 22. Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. This would have been the wedding feast. Verse 23. Now in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and Jacob went into her. Now wait a minute. He wanted Rachel. And someone might say, well, you know, on your wedding night, you should be able to know that this isn't the one that you have been working for 7 years. I mean, can't you just tell? Can't you just know? Well, you have to understand their custom and their culture. They would have a veil on. the bride to be presented would be veiled. And so all you would be able to see are the eyes, basically, plus it was evening. Look at verse 23, dark. And as a result of that situation, Laban took advantage of the situation and presented Leah to him instead of Rachel. And Jacob went in to her, verse 23 and verse 24. Laban also gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. Verse 25. So it came about in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? What was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? He was willing to deceive so many years earlier. Now it's coming back on him. It's coming back on him. And so he is upset because, you know, he wanted Rachel. He consummated the marriage by engaging in intimacy with Leah, and now the deal's done. He's married. He's married. Why have you deceived me? Verse 26, but Laban said, it is not the practice of our place to marry off the younger before the firstborn. So it was not their custom for someone who was not the firstborn to marry off first. And as a result of this, Laban wasn't honest and wasn't upfront, and in fact was very deceptive in marrying off Leah to Jacob. And now Jacob has a wife he didn't want. He wanted Rachel. So the deception here is something that has come back on him. And as a result of it, it's going to cause a little bit of problem a little bit later on. Look at verse 27. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also, talking about Rachel, for the service which you shall serve with me for another 7 years. He's already served 7 years, and because of his love for Rachel, it only seemed like a few days, verse 20. And now Laban is going to get another 7 years out of it. That's just old-fashioned deception and crooked and just a wicked way of dealing with things. And so he's trapped. He's basically giving him this proposition. If you want her, if you want Rachel, after the end of this week, verse 28, complete the week with her. That week refers to the whole wedding ceremony. Their wedding ceremonies in the ancient times lasted about a week. It wasn't just about a 2 or 3 hour activity. It was a week ceremony with the festivals that went on day after day. So that's why he said, complete your week with her. He says in verse 28, or verse 27, you complete the week with her, then I'll give you the other, we're talking about Rachel, if you serve me for another 7 years. Well, he's in love with Rachel, so he's willing to do it. Verse 28. Jacob did so and completed her week, and he gave her his daughter Rachel as his wife. So he was allowed to go ahead and marry Rachel also, but now he's bound and obligated to serve Laban for another 7 years. So a sum total of 14 years of service to Laban. Verse 29. Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maid. And that was a common custom of a wealthy family that they would give the maid in marriage to, in the marital pact, to the person marrying the daughter. Verse 30, so Jacob went into Rachel also, and indeed he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served with Laban for another 7 years. Well, he loved Rachel. He wanted to marry Rachel initially. And probably Rachel would have been the only wife he had. But now he has 2 wives, and it's going to cause trouble later on. Bigamy or polygamy always cause difficulty in the Scripture, because God ordained one man and one woman. It's supposed to be one man, one woman for life. That's how it goes. Now, in our country, it's not so much as polygamy, but you have one wife for a few years, and then you divorce, then you have another wife for a few years, and then you divorce, and then you have another one. Kind of goes in order instead of all at the same time. Well, that's not God's plan. One man, one woman for life. By the way, I'm glad that Texas decided to vote against homosexual marriages. And it's sad that we have to vote on that. I mean, in about 20 or 30 years, what else are we going to have to vote on to make it wrong in our society? I mean, just can't imagine the things that we're going to have to vote on in the future to say, okay, we can't have this, but there's enough people that have got enough sense to know it's a male and a female that get married. We'll see what happens later on. Anyway, back to Genesis chapter 29. It says in verse 31, Now the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So here, beginning in verse 32 on into chapter 30, you're going to see these children being born. And these children being born are going to be the 12 patriarchs, the 12 tribes. They will be the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. Verse 32, Leah conceived. Notice this. We're going to see this over and over again. She conceived. Conception is always pointed to as the beginning point of human life in the Bible. Both Old and New Testament, conception is when a human is a human. Leah conceived, verse 32, and bore a son and named him Reuben. For she said, Because the Lord has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. So Leah now is giving birth to Reuben, and she wants favor from Jacob. See, when you have a polygamous activity or a polygamous marriage, there's always favoring. There's always a favoring of one over the others. And it's not God's will to begin with, plus it just causes all kinds of strife and difficulty. Verse 33, Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, He has therefore given me this son also. So he named him Simeon. So you have Reuben and Simeon. Verse 34, She conceived again and bore a son, and said, Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is Levi. Those who would be of the priesthood in the nation of Israel would be within the tribe of Levi. Aaron and Moses would be descendants of this baby boy. They would be of this tribe. That's why Aaron was chosen to be the first high priest of Israel, of the tribe of Levi. Verse 35, She conceived again and bore a son, and said, This time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. Then she stopped bearing. So verse 35, you have Judah. Somebody very, very important came from Judah. Who? Christ. The Lord Jesus Christ is a descendant of Judah. In the Old Testament, Judah was the one that produced, as far as generations down the road, King David, Solomon, all the kings of the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom itself was named Judah. So Of course, the most important person ever produced from that tribe was Christ. And so that is the beginning of that tribe, so to speak, with this baby boy, Judah. Any question or comment about chapter 29 before we get into chapter 30? Yes. We're going to have to read down a little bit more to get some more insight. He was bound to her by the fact that he married her under deception. At this point, we don't have anything concerning divorce in the book of Genesis. It's not till later on you get into the law of Moses as far as putting away and the concept of divorcing. So that's in Exodus and the laws that God gives through Moses. But at this time here, you have Leah giving birth to a number of sons. And then in chapter 30, Rachel is going to bear some children as well. Did I see another hand? Yes. Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting if people would just go with the program, so to speak, and do it God's way, they would save themselves a lot of heartache, pain, and suffering and hardship. But here's the interesting thing about it. Even though Leah wasn't the chosen one as far as Jacob is concerned, it's interesting to me that she is the one who starts conceiving and giving birth to children first in this situation. And if you want to put an order of importance on the children, the most important one of all, Judah, came from Leah. Because Judah would be the one who would produce the Christ generations down the road. So it's very interesting how that works. She was not going to be the one that Jacob chose to be his wife initially. He's bound by her because of his oath, so to speak. And he loved and favored Rachel because he was in love with Rachel from the very beginning. But it was through Leah that Judah would come. Through Judah would come King David, King Solomon, all the kings, and then Christ. See, God doesn't work the way we work. Right. Everybody wanted a king to be like everyone else about them, and they chose the best they had at the time, Saul, and he was a good man at first, and then he went bad. And then it wasn't until David that things picked up a little bit as far as proper leadership. Yes. No, Christ is descended from Judah. Yes. Well, that's a good question, actually. What you have in the Bible, for all the way back to the book of Genesis, you have a seed line of people, a genealogy that's going to be traced all the way from the early days of the human race in the book of Genesis, all the way throughout history that'll come to Christ. So God is unfolding this plan that we're reading about, the details of it, in Genesis here in 29 and 30, of how Abraham was promised he would become a great nation. Well, Isaac and Jacob, now Jacob is producing the 12 tribes of the nation. Well, they would grow into a great nation, and then years and years down the road, Christ would be born in that nation. So it's an unfolding of a plan that God has, and He had it before He even created the world, to bring Christ into the world. Esau is, yeah. He will be the father of the people called the Edomites. Oh, Judah is, yeah, Judah is the ancestor of the people that would be of the tribe of Judah. And those tribes would reproduce down throughout the ages, and then Christ would be born of that lineage. So the prophecies of the Old Testament, yes, Mary is a descendant of Judah. The prophecies of the book of the Old Testament, they're very broad when you first read the first part of the Bible, and they get more and more specific as time goes on. The very first prophecy about Christ is in Genesis chapter 3 in verse 15. We'll look at that very briefly. This is God talking to Eve. Talking to the serpent, the devil. Verse 15. I will put enmity or hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise on the head. He shall be bruised on the head, and he shall bruise your heel. So in other words, he's referring to someone who would come, a descendant of Eve. And as you go throughout the book of Genesis, you find out that it's going to go through Abraham. Then Abraham will produce a nation. That will be the nation of Israel. Then it would be of the tribe of Judah within the nation of Israel. Then later on in Old Testament history, it would be of the family of David. And then it comes to Christ in the New Testament. So it's a beautiful unfolding of God's scheme. And He had this seed line that started all the way back with Adam and Eve. In fact, in the New Testament, you can read there in Matthew chapter 1, there's one genealogy of Christ that goes all the way back to Abraham. Then in, Luke 4 is the other one. I think it's Luke 4. You have, no, it's Luke 3. Luke 3, 23 through 38 is another genealogy of Christ going all the way back to Adam. So those are the genealogies there. Luke 3, 23 and through 38. Verses 23 through 38. Traces Christ's genealogy all the way back to Adam. Matthew only goes to Abraham, because Matthew was written to the Jewish people for the most part. So we're seeing here in Genesis the details of that genealogy that's found in the New Testament. Genesis 30 and verse 1. It says, Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she became jealous of her sister, and she said to Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. So again, another problem with this whole polygamy thing is the whole jealousy issue. So Rachel saw that she was not producing any children, but God, because of Leah's situation, opened her womb, so to speak, so she would produce some children. Look at verse 2. Genesis 30 and verse 2. Then Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Verse 3. She said, Here is my maid Bilhah. Go in to her, that she may bear on my knees, that through her I too may have children. Does that sound familiar? That goes back to Abraham, what Sarah did with Hagar. That was the normal custom of that day. Now, I'm just not saying it's right, but that was the normal custom of that day. You hand it over, well, if I can't produce children, here's my handmaiden, produce children for me through her. Verse 4. So she gave him the maid Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went in to her. Verse 5. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me and has indeed heard my voice and has given me a son. Therefore she named him Dan. So here you have Dan. We're going to stop there because there's much more to go into. But here you have the 12 tribes being produced. And you see some of the jealousy and the strife that goes on in when you have a marriage that has multiple wives. That's just contrary to God's will. And so it causes difficulty. Anytime you depart from God's pattern of doing things, you're going to fall upon problems. We'll continue our study next week, Lord willing. Yes. In fact, Joseph's genealogy is traced in Matthew, and Mary's genealogy is traced in Luke. So they go all the way back.